If you're like me, vinyl records mean a lot to you. From sound to visuals to tangibility, it's an unmatched experience in today's scroll and click culture. And if it means a lot to you and I, imagine what it means to those who've put their own music to wax through the years.
There really is something pretty profound about holding a piece of vinyl that has your music on it for the first time.
I'm Jim Hankey, host and producer of Vinyl Emergency, a podcast where your favorite songwriters, producers, and other personalities talk about how the mere existence of vinyl has influenced their lives and careers. People like Roseanne Cash, Oscar nominee Michael Shannon, Hozier.
I remember falling in love with Hal & Wolf's The London Sessions.
Adam Duritz, Ben Gibbard, Lisa Loeb.
As I was going through my records, I didn't realize I forgot I had Andy Warhol sign it.
Plus members of REM, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, Run DMC, and more.
The arts succeeds where politics and religion fails.
Vinyl is more than just the music that's on it. It's also the memories, legends, and science that made it in the first place.
Streaming will never kill the true record makers. You can't stop thinking side one and side two, even if the world doesn't care. It's in their blood.
Find Vinyl Emergency on your preferred podcast app today and give us a follow on Instagram at Vinyl Emergency.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Safe and Sound Podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Houtsma, licensed mental health counselor. My guest today is Rachael Dietkus, former violin player for Very Secretary in the late 90s and early 2000s, licensed social worker, and founder of Social Workers Who Design, a social conscious design studio that advocates, teaches, and mentors about trauma-informed design. In this episode, we talk about Rachael's involvement in the late 90s music scene and skate culture, as well as what got her into social work and design. Hope you enjoy the interview. Oh yeah, are you doing telehealth?
I don't do counseling or any clinical work. Like
okay.
I don't do any like direct practice work right now. So the last time I was probably doing work that would be considered more clinical or direct practice was when I was at the VA at Veterans Affairs. Yeah, okay. So it's been a while because I left there in 2016.
Okay,
so that would have been a decade ago.
That's heavy work too.
Yeah,
very, very heavy work.
Yeah.
I'm kind of interested in were you doing case management? Were you doing like just straight counseling?
Yeah, I did my field placement there.
Okay.
So I did my social work field placement at a VA, at the VA in Danville, Illinois. And then I got hired on there. So I was a patient advocate. I started out as a patient advocate for the first couple of years. So wasn't technically considered a clinical role, but there were two of us who were social workers who were in that role. And then from there, what did I do after that? I spent a year working in engineering. So I actually was like a kind of a strategist and like an admin person with the chief engineer. So I got to work on like building projects and like anticipating what were future needs, like 50 and 100 years out. And then I was the healthcare for homeless veterans program coordinator. So kind of went from, I studied more, I have my clinical license, but I studied more like macro social work. So focusing on like leadership and advocacy. And so, yeah, with that role, I supervised a lot of social workers who were doing the more like direct practice in the field type of work. But most of my job was really like program management and, like navigating the budget and advocating for money and staffing and things of that nature. So, was occasionally in the field, but for the most part, I was really, just doing, much more like macro social work.
Okay. So how do you go from clinical field into engineering? Where's the leap there? How did that make that connection with me? For me?
I mean, I think the thing that's interesting about Veterans Affairs, at least on the hospital side, is that there are, well, first of all, it's the largest employer of social workers in the country. And, some of it is just being in the right place at the right time when there's a certain kind of a need and your skill sets like align and match up with whatever is maybe going on at that time. So I really think it was a scenario like that. Like the patient advocate job was intense as all get out. I've said this many, many times. Like I will never ever have a job like harder than that job. Even being a parent is like nothing compared to what that job was. It was just high volume, high emotional intensity. 99% of the people like coming to me they were like incredibly upset about something.
Sure.
They took their anger out on you, and a good majority of the time, not all the time, but a good majority of the time, that frustration was very much warranted because the system was failing people, So I learned quite a bit, but I mean, I could not have been, I was beyond burnout. I was like crispy, like from that job.
Yeah.
But next level burnout is like, 1,000% crispy. And so this opportunity came up with working with the chief of engineering. And I knew of him because just the way that it was a hospital facility based VA, you get to know a lot of people, like no matter what job you're in. And so when I saw it come up, I thought, oh, this is an opportunity just to do something that was actually way more familiar to me than like anything like directly related to like direct practice or even social work. And so I applied for it, and I don't know how many other people applied and interviewed for it, but yeah, like I was, got selected by the chief engineer, and I love that job. Love that job. It's definitely like hands down one of the best jobs I've ever had. The chief engineer was just a lovely person to work with, very hardworking. He was also from Danville, so we just had some like situational awareness of this place that we grew up.
Yep.
We both grew up in the east end of Danville, which wasn't like too far away from. We didn't know each other when we were kids and growing up, but there was just this mutual respect for what the other person did, and it was probably the first time truly as a social worker where I had a colleague or a peer who was outside of social work who just had a real appreciation and respect for like what it was that I both did and could do. But yeah, I mean, it definitely is like a leap, but for me, it's like it just felt like a natural, like very logical, like transition to that next thing.
Yeah, I think that it's probably for those who don't. I've never worked in the VA system. I've worked in community mental health, which is not the same thing, but high volume, trauma, anger, like all those things kind of going on, and it's. I'm actually curious. Like, what was your? Can you remember your highest caseload number?
Ooh. I mean, it was, as a patient advocate, we didn't maintain like a caseload per se.
Okay.
But the highest number that I remember of just like either veterans and family members, caregivers that came in with situations, like the number that I remember was 23 in a given day, which is a lot, know?
Oh yeah.
And these weren't like scheduled appointments or like every single veteran, like, required like 1 hour. But 23 is a lot, I think, for even if it's just, you kind of have like an open door policy and you've got people like, coming in like one right after another. It's God, it's a hard job. I mean, anyone who is in that type of trying to help a client or a customer while also like navigating and being expected to defend the system that is often broken or at least flawed, deeply flawed. Like you're just caught in the middle. I mean, you were truly caught between a rock and a hard place. Like most of the time. So there were some of them probably just most complex situations I've dealt with as a social worker, but also as a person, dealing with like complex systems. Those are situations that I encountered as a social worker, as part of that job. You probably know this just from your own like experience in like clinical work. You have situations where maybe you won't remember like the name of a person, but but their situations are going to stick with you for quite some time, if not the rest of your life, know?
Yeah.
And there's a few of those that are from that time period that are just like, I wish I could forget them, but
right. Yeah.
but they're going to be there for a minute,
Yeah. Yeah. And by a minute could mean years.
Yeah. At this point. Yeah. Cause I was in that job from like 2010 to 2012. And so at this point, that's, that was 14 years ago. And there are a couple situations that, I remember them so clearly, like they happened yesterday.
Yeah. In some ways, I think somebody said like, and I think it's clinically significant and statistically significant that like working in those types of environments, very often, burnout is vicarious trauma, or it's, PTSD, comes and goes. It's almost in some ways inevitable unless I don't know how people don't. I know for me, it just hit me like I've been in the field for about 13 years, and I think all my trauma caught up with me about 2 years ago, and it was pretty severe, and it led to me like basically taking an entire. Well, I didn't really have the choice not to, but like I had a pretty severe breakdown, and it, that burnout hit pretty hard, and it spun me into something. But we carry all these things, there's stuff that I remember too. Like I have a really good memory for people's names and and situations and stuff like that. But even if we forget about it, sometimes our body still holds on to it, in certain ways. It's really interesting because I feel like right now, at least in the clinical field, there's a lot of people who are looking to exit, and not knowing where to go, right? And not knowing where exactly to transition to. Specifically when people find out like, hey, this work might not be for me. I know at times that I've looked at possibly getting out just because of sustainability, and kind of having this skill set and not knowing exactly how to transfer it into maybe something else. Because what I've found in just kind of like looking at other jobs, like people are looking for titles and different kinds of experiences and things like that. And I know that with social work, because I have a master's in counseling psychology, the field can broaden a little bit more than maybe somebody with a master's in counseling. So when I was going through trying to figure out whether or not I was going to do clinical work or I was going to like what I was going to do, people would usually say you should probably go for a social work degree because you can maybe branch out off, you can do private practice if you want to, you can do like a bunch of different things. So I think it was really cool that you were able to transition into that role, because I feel like there's a lot of people who don't get out, like, and it's difficult.
Yeah. It's a tricky field. As a whole, whether you're a social worker, a counselor, psychologist, I think that especially if you're doing direct practice primarily, I think about certain elements of my timeline that probably, at the time when I went back to school would have felt like, oh, I'm starting grad school so late. But I look back now and I'm grateful that I had, almost a decade of nonprofit experience before I went back to school and got my MSW. Or I think about what are the things that inspired me to even pursue social work, as opposed to maybe pursuing like a master's in public health or going to law school or something else, So there's something to be said around being multi-passionate and having a just a mental fortitude to not abandon these other parts of of yourself, but also like these other things that you like care deeply about. I mean, look at what you're doing. So you are, you've had this evolution with your podcast. If you just look at the podcast as like an element of an overall practice,
right.
And it's had this evolution based off of the conversations that you've had with different people.
Yeah.
But probably the original driving force was this lane of music, and
yes, absolutely,
and seeing where like the music piece like plays into and overlaps. I mean, plus we've had this great evolution of people being much more open about talking about like
absolutely.
mental health, like the good, the bad, and the ugly of that. So clearly you are your own demonstration of like the multi-passionate practitioner, and how do you demonstrate that in these ways that might be formally part of your work, but also like informally. There's stuff that I do when I think about this like span of time from 2010 to present. So I can say, I've been a social worker for like 16 years now. And, but I had a whole like life of other things that I did before that. I have all these other things that I do outside of social work. And I have a lot of things that I do that I think I'm a fan of just congruence. And so I want things to have some like element of alignment, especially as I get older. It's too hard to have these separate identities that can't intersect with one another. So if there are ways for things to be like interconnected, I'm all for that. I may have been more hesitant with that, 10, 15, 20 years ago. It's like, have this like sort of like separation of church and state, if you will. But but there's something nice about like the blending, and there have been hints of that like all along. Like if I go back and look at like different things that I did, especially in the nonprofit world, I was constantly trying to find like creative ways to bring in creative elements into like activist work, or how can I like organize like a benefit show, with bands for this other thing that I'm doing, so it's always important to like go back and look at what were those early signs and signals that now make total sense.
Yeah, for me, it has mostly been I needed to find something else to kind of like my identity was in being like a clinical worker, right? And being a therapist, but I had this whole life before that was involved in music and making music, and also TV and film. That was like my original bachelor's degree was TV and film. And I really needed to tap into some of that because there is that. I feel like as creatives, those things kind of live inside of us and they go dormant for a while. I didn't necessarily do any music when I was like in my mid-20s. I just decided music probably wasn't going to happen for me as much as I had kind of wanted it to. And I ended up kind of putting that down for a while. But then the pandemic came around and all of a sudden I had this office. And I had I'm signed to a lease. I have no clients in the office because we're all doing telehealth. And it really sparked back up. I made like a little mini studio inside of my office, and nobody was in the office complex. So I could, at this point, I could kind of tap back in to some of that creative outlet, and it, for me, I think when I started doing this, it was more kind of therapy for myself, and being able to talk to people that I had really admired and whose like music had really touched me, in like in a very large way. whether that
Mhm.
is mentally, emotionally, and I needed to get back. I don't know. I needed something for myself, right? We all need kind of ways, even though I was going to see a therapist myself and all these things, that creative thing, like, was dormant in there, but I think it's always there, and like learning how to tap into that. I do website design now for therapists, because I enjoy that as well. And so, like you said, melding, it's become like a journey in figuring out how to meld the two. And the podcast has become something that has been great at doing that,
Mhm.
and I've really seen it take off this year in ways that it hadn't taken off in previous years. So I like doing, right before this, I was working on some clips and stuff like that to post on social media, because I don't know, I find video editing fun and things like that.
Mhm.
I'm curious for you. You said you grew up in that's Danville, oh,
Illinois.
Illinois. Okay, Danville,
Yeah.
Danville, Illinois.
Yep.
And that's, how far is that outside of Chicago or Champaign, Urbana?
Yeah. So outside of Chicago, so Danville, Illinois is about 2 hours and 45 minutes, like pretty much like straight south from
Right.
Chicago. And then Danville's really close to the Indiana border, and it's about 30-ish minutes or so east of Champaign Urbana. So yeah, so it's very close, Danville very much working class town growing up. Matt and Darcy from Polyvinyl, like, grew up there, strong like skateboarding culture, like,
Mhm.
independent music scene, all of that. But skateboarding was really like probably the big linchpin that I think pulled and brought a lot of people together. And, so growing up there in the 80s into the early 90s, yeah, it's pretty limited in all the
Sure.
things that you can do.
I'm curious. You were talking about skate culture just in general, and there's been a theme of that when I'm talking with people from the 80s and 90s. That I was just talking with Dan Didier from the Promise Ring, and he was kind of saying that was his kind of entry point into the scene and the music scene and stuff like that. Why do you think skate culture, and specifically that music scene, was linked up so much? Do you have any thoughts
Oh,
about that?
oh my God. Many, many, many thoughts. I mean, one, if you think back on just the way people learned about like the latest like skate video. I mean, these were like VHS tapes that
Mhm.
people were getting. So you would get them through some type of mail order or at an actual skate shop. If you didn't purchase something yourself, like, you would be watching it with buddies, like at an actual, like, typically a local independent like skate shop. Um, but that was often a way that people like discovered and found out about new music, was through like skate videos. I mean, music and skating, I think, is just so like deeply like interconnected
Yeah.
that it's hard to imagine one without the other in many
Especially
respects.
punk. Like,
Oh, 1,000%.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so just think of there's anytime I think of like just skateboarding, there's so much different kinds of music that comes up. But the band that I often think of like immediately first is Fire Hose. Like,
Mhm.
there are certain songs that that's how you learned about them. So whether it was Fire Hose, Jawbreaker. I mean, there may have been like other bands. There's certainly like Fugazi was all over like skateboarding
Sure.
and skate
Yeah.
culture. Um, yeah, it's it was it was it was just it was almost like you didn't necessarily even uh analyze it or try to understand it. It just felt like it was inherently there. I mean, it's like
Right.
it's like a Reese's peanut butter cup. Yeah.
They yeah, instinctually go together.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of like old, you know, there's things that like kids today don't necessarily. Kids today, I feel like, you know, feel like I'm an old man, but like things like CCM magazine, or you know, doing like mail order skateboarding stuff, and like even though I wasn't really into skate culture, like skate culture all of a sudden became fashion culture too.
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? That's where I had simples and airwalk and like all these different types of like, you know, I think my brother one time had like an I Love Cop shirt, which was like its own brand, its own
Yeah.
brand, which is like so completely like foreign now on something
Well,
like
for now, but I'm sure, you know, I don't know the origin of those shirts. I mean, it's probably a pretty fascinating one, but I'm gonna like maybe take a guess that some of it was just a play on on cops being so like
right,
anti-skateboarding, like
right,
constantly. No, I mean, as if like, you know, skateboarders are like the worst possible thing that like,
right,
you know, young kids could be doing, or not even young kids. I mean, you know, like Matt and my husband Steve like still skate regularly, like Matt from Polyvinyl. I mean, like,
yeah,
so I mean, what's the old like adage, like you get old because you stop skateboarding, not like you know, you get old because you keep skateboarding or something like that. I think I just butchered it, but I think you get the point of that.
yeah,
Yeah, it's I mean, there's also just such a there's a there's an independence and like and just freedom of expression that
yeah,
is can be so individualized, yet at the same time deeply inspired by what others are doing like in community. You
yeah,
know, so like you can you can skate while like on your own, but you can also like, you know, skate with other people, and there's just a communal like aspect of it that I feel like has always been there.
yeah. It was really
Yeah.
interesting to kind of see that because I was more involved in like youth group and church culture. I grew up on the
Mm,
East Coast, but we
yeah.
had it's funny how we like I thought it was cool, but like others didn't. We had like groups of skaters in our youth group and stuff like that, and they were always out in the parking lot, like doing stuff. And there was like divisions of people in our like basically like in our church, and it was so funny because like when I look back on it, the skaters were like listen to like MXPX, and they listened to like all these different kinds of punk bands and stuff like that. And I was introduced to punk and that type of music through them and through the
Mm,
stuff that they would listen to. But there
hmm.
was this huge othering of them too. And it was like this kind of um, label that was put on them just simply by what they wore and what they did, you
Yeah.
know. And it just thinking back on that, how interesting it was. I grew up as somebody who kind of like floated through different groups. I didn't have one group. Um, but my friend Kyle, you know, was kind of into skate culture, and he was honestly the nicest kid to me. And he was kind of like an older brother, and like he stuck up for me in times when like the cool and popular kids would like put me down. And
Hmm.
so there was this kind of like association then. Like I wanted to be like him, you know, and he was listening to ska and like all these different, you know, punk and stuff like that. And we still correspond together. Um, but it's interesting how this is, you know, mid 90s, like late 90s, how big that culture was and how also it infiltrated religious circles too, and just the kind of view. There was this inherent view, I think, that kids were rebellious who were doing that, you know. And I don't know for you, like how did you how did you get involved in that? How did you get involved in skating? and what drew you to it?
I mean, it was definitely being just the like certain friend groups that I had in high school, you know. I think one thing that probably helped with a bit of like an entry point was just, I have an older brother who's 4 years older than me and had just like impeccable taste in music, and so I was lucky enough, and he didn't skate, so he wasn't a skateboarder, but my brother like was and is like an artist, um and I think just being around like alternative to whatever like the status quo and norm culture was like at that time. And again, this would have been, late 80s into the like, early 90s. So I was fortunate enough to have this like deep appreciation for just a lot of music that was definitely influential on other types of music that I would end up liking. And then also like the type of music that I would end up playing myself, like either in bands or like with other people or and what have you. And so I feel like that is definitely like a piece of it. And then that just carried over into high school. And then, you form your friend groups based off of like alliances and things that you have in common with other people. My brother was he was a very talented artist, still is a talented artist, but he was known for being he was known. Like I inherited a lot of teachers that he had, and there were some people who crossed over in high school with him, and therefore like it's almost like I had a little bit of an ushering into some of this like art punk, alternative culture at that time. But there was also, I mean, there's something like unique about, and it's easy to say that, Danville, Illinois is like a super special place because there are a lot of creative efforts that have come out of this, seemingly kind of like rundown, incredibly like working class poor now, like kind of town. But you think about the types of things that were available to us and that we were drawn to. So I think one of the things, so I mentioned my brother, someone else who I think was around his age was this person named J.W. Martin, who owned a skate shop in Danville. He may have even started a small skate shop when he himself was still in high school. And so
that's pretty cool.
Like, it's like when you have someone who is like a little bit older, who can like give you an example of this thing that exists outside of like what you are going to naturally be exposed to. It opens up your aperture, and it opens up these lenses into these other worlds. The other thing for me is that like you mentioned, I was telling my daughter about this actually like a few days ago. We were talking about the different cliques and the different groups of people, and she was describing a certain like set of characteristics of kids now, and I was like, wow. And I could feel myself trying to place like, I wonder what that group, like where would that group of like, middle schoolers fit into what I have as like a frame of reference from when I was like that age. And but I was telling her that I had a lot of friends who were like artists. I had a lot of buddies who were like skateboarders. I had a lot of people who were like the super smart kids and like the super nerds. Because I was also involved on like the academic team, but I was also part of like this other like nerdy group because I was on yearbook and newspaper and I took photos, And so I was just talking about how like the through line were these different creative aspects of things that I was drawn to, that no matter what friend group or experience group I was part of, like I was still like who I was. From one to the other. Like these other like, again, like these like multi-passionate aspects of me like still existed in these other circles. but I think, photography was also probably a really big one for me. Like, I mean, I was always taking photos for like either like primarily for the yearbook, but for the yearbook and for the school newspaper. And I, there was a skateboarding was a great thing to take photos of.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like, I still every once in a while like discover like a pile of old like black and white photos that I took from back then, or someone like an old friend will share something and be like, I think Rachel took this, but I'm not sure, but I think be like, like I don't know, like I may have, at this point it's 30 plus years ago, so it's like it seems kind of fuzzy and familiar.
Sure,
I'm not sure. Probably, maybe, I don't know. But yeah, I think it's just I think being involved and not just being like a spectator, like looking in from the outside, but being like actively part of those environments and those activities. Like that person I mentioned, like J.W. Martin, he and his wife ended up moving. They moved from Danville to Champaign-Urbana, where they opened up a different skate shop, like on campus. And like at some point during those days, like I ended up working at that skate shop. So again, it's just this evolution, this opportunity of that evolution to just continue on. But I mean, there's so many aspects of skate culture that I just absolutely love. There's some skate companies that I still to this day just I am a huge fan of. And,
who are they?
Oh my God. So Stereo. I mean, I will forever be like a number one fan of like Stereo. I think Stereo is like, talk about like a blending of like music and art and design. I mean, it's just plus like, the actual like activity and movement of skateboarding. Like Jason Lee, the now actor, but then skateboarder, wow, very involved with Stereo, like still, but very much back in the day. Girl skateboards. I mean, it's just a skate company called Girl is just like cool. Their logo is like has maintained like consistency since the early days. Those two are definitely my two favorite. But then I'd also say like Chocolate. So I mean, again, I'm very much drawn to like the skaters that are like the pros that are on those different like teams, but also for me, it's much more like the style and the vibe that they sort of gave. There's looking back, I don't know, I definitely would not have like been able to have articulated this like back then, but looking back, those were also some of the skate companies that were much more like inclusive, and they were they stood up for different like rights-based things or like advocacy and this that whatever. So but yeah, just I mean, just cool.
I'm really curious about those conversations that you're having with your daughter in middle school. I work with teens and young adults. That's my demographic that I work with. And something that I've kind of noticed, and I've talked about this with other people on the podcast, is that everything seems really mishmashed together as far as culturally. When I was a kid, it was like you were a musician, or you were band geek, or you were like a nerd, or you were super into metal. You had the metal heads at school.
Your real distinctions, yeah.
Yeah, there were super real distinctions, and the things that you could identify with and have your group and your culture with were there. Even if it was like church or like whatever you were going to at that time. And what I'm used to be able to look at somebody and well, at least in my 20s too, you would look at somebody and know exactly what music they listened to.
Oh, yeah.
Knew exactly like what part of the subculture they were part of.
Yeah.
And, now as an adult in my 40s, I might look at somebody with plugs, and I might look at somebody who's, maybe more alternative look. And they're like, I watch Pokemon, and I also like listen to like EDM is my favorite, and stuff like that. And it's almost as I become the old person because I'm like, I don't know how any of you like what is the thing that you identify with,
Yeah.
because it's so mishmashed.
It is. I mean, like the running joke back in like high school and probably in my early 20s was like, hair and shoes. Like you were making very quick, judgments based off of hair and shoes.
Yeah.
And then you like kind of go from there. I think with it's funny, like I think with having worked at the VA, and my husband, who would much rather be known as a skateboarder than any of these other hats that he wears. But he is a veteran, a combat veteran, and having I think having so many veterans in our friend group, but also having worked at a VA, like I can spot a veteran a mile away. Like there's an affect, there's a certain way that they carry themselves. Like I can identify it almost immediately. And I would say it's the same thing with skateboarders. I mean, even though I don't skate myself, I can if I hear like the wheels of a true skateboard, not a longboard or not like a cruiser, like an actual like skateboard,
Yeah.
like on pavement, like my head is turning like within seconds. Like,
Yeah.
So I think I don't know, I think it depends. I do hear what you're saying though. There's a lot of like those lines are they're very blurry now. And I don't know, I'm kind of fascinated by it. Like my kiddo is 14, and so I mean just right in the middle of like that age of self-discovery and expression and all those things. But I gotta say, I mean, she has unbelievable taste in music. I mean, it is like I will say it is. I'm sure it is. It is a bit influenced by like myself and and her dad, my husband. But a lot of it has been like her own self discovery. And I mean, like I would have wanted to be like her best friend in in middle school.
Yeah. Yeah.
If it was just based off of like style and music, I mean, like, so I still feel like that's a huge like determining factor of like what sort of category do people fall into. And I mean, it's easy for me to say that because I can hear and I witness the things that she is like, that she's drawn to, the things that she's actually like really moved by. And her just wanting to, I mean, I've learned about so many bands because of her, like just as we get older, I think it's harder to keep tabs on like all the bands that are doing all the different things, which is both part of just, maybe that's just part of growing up, but that's also unless you're in the music industry exclusively, it'd be really, really hard to maintain all that. But I've learned about so many bands like through her, which I think is pretty amazing when you think about it.
Yeah.
I'm sure you will have like similar experiences like as your kids get older. I mean, it's one of the coolest things. It's like I feel like I knew in the back of my head that could maybe happen, but like as it started to actually occur, it's like, wow, this is pretty remarkable.
Yeah. Something that's really cool too that I have seen, this is kind of adjacent, kind of going back to skate culture, that still exists. That is still prominent with kids that I see.
Oh yeah.
Is that, and they have the certain look and like their passion is that. And it's a solid identity. It's a solid thing. And that has kind of like carried over through sort of time. And it's like been the one consistent thing that I've seen. Everybody wants to belong to something, right? I think when you're a teenager and even into a young adulthood, people need identity. and people need something that they can kind of glob onto, that they feel accepted through, and what makes them unique in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard for me because I'm seeing a lot of my clients who are having a hard time with kind of feeling of kind of trying to find their place. And kind of even existentially, with the time that we live into, this kind of feeling of doom and gloom, and just kind of like, that itself can become its kind of own subculture within that. But I kind of look at, teenagers these days, and a sense of purpose and just sense of who they kind of fit in with. Since what I found is a lot of those things have been mishmashed together, there's less of an identity, because it's not so subdivided anymore. And I think one of the most prominent groups that is accepting, and that is, people are able to identify with now, is the LGBTQ plus community. Because it is its own thing, but it's a huge tent, so you can be individualized, and you can be part of a group, and part of a group that is incredibly accepting. And it's amazing in that way. But it seems like if you aren't part of that group, there's a little bit of struggle to kind of figure out what makes me individually unique, as a person, but also where do I belong in the world? And that's what I kind of see in therapy.
What do you think are some of the things that are fueling that?
I mean, I do think sort of that mishmash of culture that is kind of like sort of homogeneous genius, I should say, homogeneous or homogenous. Where there is less classification, less there's so much exposure. And when you think about it, just in terms of like even Spotify, and there's a really large exposure to everything. And I think that can become incredibly overwhelming, but things are just less defined. There's less like, it's this culture and this culture and this culture when you walk into a high school. I also think in some ways that community and being involved with community has sort of devolved a little bit. As much as you want to say about religion or community, that was a big thriving community for people. And what I see is that a lot of these teenagers and stuff, they're really confined to their rooms. Their social, there's less community that's involved, less real world involvement between each other, and more isolation. And more, online culture has become huge. And how people are communicating, a lot, this is kind of funny because a lot of the times when I'm talking with people and they're having these like important discussions, really like important things that they want to say to people, I'm like, did you say that to their face? And they're like, no, I said it through text. And it blows my mind because there's so much that's lost within the presence of each other, right? When you're talking with somebody. So it's a completely different culture and a style of relating. But kind of to sum all that up, I think it's a loss, a disconnection from community in general, and more isolation, and less defined genres of stuff. That's my personal kind of thing that I've seen.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things that you're jogging my memory of. I mean, I'm thinking of even, back in the early to mid to late 90s, there was obviously like the internet existed. It was this thing. There was email, but it wasn't the primary way that people communicated. It was just one of many. So there was talking on the phone, there was talking in person, there was there was a lot of letter writing, a lot of mail that was getting sent, it's all over the place. And email was often used as a just again, I recall it being like one of many tools that you could use.
Yeah.
And then and then there starts to be more of this like AOL like chat function type of communication, because even then, like even in the like late 90s, I mean, again, like you could text, but the way that the phones that we had at that time, even if you were lucky enough to have a cell phone like in the late 90s, which not everyone did, it was much more common like once we got into the 2000s. And even then, if you had a cell phone, it was cumbersome to text. You really only texted if you had an emergency, like that.
It was 10 cents a text too.
I mean, yeah, that's right. Like it cost something. I forgot about that aspect of it. So it'd be just like even like it was a means to an end to try to coordinate with other people when you met in person, as opposed to like the primary way that you communicated. Like you would never like break up with someone over text back then. You know what I mean? You would never get into like an argument with someone like over text. I mean, I'm sure there were still various like, like social behaviors that existed that were either like on this healthy, unhealthy continuum. But yeah, I mean, the convenience of the technology is what has replaced it. It has mimicked a form of intimacy that has really like replaced what it means to have a relationship with other people, and not necessarily like a romantic one, but like just to be in relationship with other people. So I mean, it's an amazing tool. But I can say that as someone who is like 50 years old, like I'm fascinated by the tool. Like I don't know, I hate it many times, like probably several times a day. But I also I remember a life before it and made it to this point,
Right.
So I just can't even imagine like what I can't imagine like what it is like for someone, because I can try to empathize, but I really can't understand as deeply as if I was living through it right now myself, Like my daughter will never not know a childhood without some form of technology, like being force fed to her either like through me as a parent or expected through all these different channels, and how you control and mitigate that in balancing like healthy growing up. And, I mean, there's just ridiculous amounts of research that just is every single day is reminding us of how poor the outcomes can be like on like kids and teenagers for a wide variety of reasons.
I mean, when I look at especially teenagers, male, female, non-binary, wherever you cross the spectrum, the issue of body image and the issue of think about like you used to look at like magazines, right, and celebrity culture, but you weren't inundated with them on a daily basis, right? And you weren't necessarily maybe on TV or something like that if you're really, but you could like shut that off if you wanted. You could kind of like disconnect. And not only are these apps like incredibly addictive, but there's parasocial relationships and there's manipulation and there's teenagers are constantly bombarded with this, right? And this image of a life that doesn't really exist.
Yeah.
Right. And that has really kind of affected mental health in the capacity that I see with teenagers. They're constantly comparing themselves on a daily basis in ways that maybe aren't as intense. We're the only kind of, so I'm 42, so I'm on the, a late millennial. we're the like part of the generation, Gen X and older millennials, that are like, we know a time without that, and we can kind of compare it to what it is now. And we were kind of at the forefront of a totally different internet culture, you know, and a totally different starting to communicate in different ways. But we also knew what it was like without that, you know. The amount of people that I see doing long distance relationships or connecting with people very far away with them has grown exponentially. I had a girlfriend. I grew up in New Jersey. I live on the West Coast now. But when I left for college, I went to school in Oklahoma, and she was a senior in high school. Oklahoma did not get text messages on the Verizon network. So I would leave, and I had this like Motorola phone that I could play like Snake on, and like that was about it. But as soon as I left the time zone, I left the state, communication was only through email, or it was only through calling at night, and it had to be past 9 o'clock because then it was free. Right? There wasn't communication all the time. There was no access all the time to somebody, you know, and there's just constant access to people all the time. What, you know, whether you can mitigate it, but it's still there, you know. So it's just like, I don't know. It's, as a parent, you know, and as a therapist too, trying to navigate what their world is like now and stay relevant as a therapist, and their kind of communication patterns can sometimes, you know, be a struggle. And like emo, Midwest emo, you know, punk and stuff like that is not as huge of a subculture as it was back then. And it looks different because all genres evolve. You know, I talked with Steve Lamos about this, and I was asking him, like, where are the house shows now? Where are the, like, you know, the DIY type of things? And he was kind of perplexed by that a little bit because he teaches at, I think, the University of Colorado. And he was like, I'm going to have to ask my students that because I don't really know at this point. And like Bellingham, where I live, has kind of, because it's a university town, they're coming back and kind of having house shows and different things like that. But it was just this kind of like, when I talk with my other friend who's a professor at the University of Arizona, and he works with college students all the time, he's incredibly perplexed by just the kind of youth and subculture in college and how they're connecting with each other. Or even, this is kind of interesting too, about how the actually abuse of mental health and mental health systems within, you know, kind of using things as an excuse has become so prevalent. And looking at resilience and those different things. But just, I don't know, that's a lot of like, I have ADHD, so like sometimes my mind is like all over the place. So if I'm not making sense,
I was tracking you. You know, I do think that house parties still exist. I think that they just might be happening at times where like our generation is just like asleep, or you know, like, I mean, I'm often like making jokes about how, you know, some of my favorite bands, like they could be playing like at the house across the street, but if they're playing like past 9, like, God, I don't know if I'm going to be able to make it, you know? So, I mean, I think some of it is just, is how are some of those things communicated? Because, you know, back when we would have been younger, you know, you learned about shows through like your network of friends who were also part of like a scene, or you were playing that show yourself. But like one of the main ways that shows were communicated was through flyers, right? You know, again, it wasn't necessarily through like like
The internet.
I just I don't remember getting. I'm thinking about like there's a venue that used to be in downtown Champaign called the Blind Pig, and one of the best venues to play at, to go to shows at. I mean, it was just so good. And I don't remember like there being like a Blind Pig mailing list, I didn't get anything in like postal mail. I don't remember getting anything via email. Like you would go to a record store and you would get like this little I don't know, it was like a 1/3 of a sheet of paper, but it was always on cardstock that had like all the shows for like the month of like February on it. So you constantly knew like you had things that you were looking forward to. You had things that you could kind of plan out. And it was typically, I don't remember it ever being like I don't remember if I picked up the the list of shows for February, I rarely knew what was coming up in March or April. Right. I mean, every once in a while, like it would say something like, kind of smaller on the bottom, but Fireside Bowl was like another one of those venues who would do like similar thing. Like, so you would kind of know like for like a solid month, like what shows were coming. And these were venues that had shows almost every single day of the week. Like Blind Pig had shows every single day of the week, almost every single day of the week. Fireside Bowl like was heavy on like the Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday like circuit, but then started to expand to like almost like 7 days a week. But yeah, like I can't even. The flyers were so big. I mean, talk about another like way of like creative expression and just like communication and these like this DIY marketing. Yeah, I do. I want to say that there was something, Matt and Darcy are like owners of the American Football House, like here in Urbana. And we were over there for something. It was something within the past year. I can't remember what it was exactly. I think they were showing us, I think they were just showing us like the renovation because they took like almost a year to do all of this like amazing renovation on the inside of the house. So we were over there and they were showing us, and it's part of the house is still on High Street, which was a street where there were a lot of house parties. There were house parties at that house like back in the day, but there were also other houses right around there where there were house parties. And I could have swore like I could hear either a band practicing or what seemed to be like maybe like the early makings of like a house party like happening at a house down the road. Yeah. And so it's like it gave that to me was like, oh, okay, that's like a signal of hope that the kids are all right. They're still doing something. It might look a little bit different than what it was like when we were younger. There's still shows that happen at like various churches or some of those informal like types of spaces that are here in town and just even like, across the country too. So, but yeah, I think online music, the access to music, I remember like Mud Records. That's like the label that like Very Secretary was on Mud Records. Braid was on Mud Records in the early days. A lot of local bands were on Mud Records, and here in Champaign Urbana. And I remember one of the guys who did like the PR kind of handled most of the bands, if you will. I remember him like approaching us and saying that like there was an opportunity for various bands on Mud Records to have like their music like digitized, and we needed to sign a contract with eMusic. I remember thinking like, what is this? Like what is this shit? Like, but like I don't remember thinking like, oh, this is just going to be a passing fad, but it was just like, what? Like, why would you diminish the quality of listening to music in that format? To me, it was more like, it was all about like the quality of what you could listen to. And this is like during an era of even recording was most of it, not all of it, but most of it was digital recording. And it was hit or miss, like listen to any of those bands from back during that like mid to late 90s like era, and pay attention to how the drums sound. They sound super thumpy. You know that was part of like the early days of like Pro Tools and like whatever like the version was like before Pro Tools. I mean, real thumpy. It was hard to like create like a quality sound. So I just remember thinking like, what? Like, why? Who would want to listen to like something digitally like that? Like, there's no way that will sound good. And then now here we are, 25 years later. And I still think that, remastered versions of things that were on tape from many, many years ago, I still think that is like the stuff that sounds the best. But just the evolution of how we listen to music and how we take it in has changed in wild ways.
I think there's been this resurgence of vinyl too. My nephew's 18 and he's he's just like super into vinyl. He's ADHD, so like when he gets into something, he really gets into something. But he is his kind of thing is like, I think that our generation is starting to want to kind of go back to something physical, and that's why like vinyl is so big right now, because actually holding an album in your hand and looking at artwork, like when you made an album, it just, even with CDs, like it was so exciting to get the lyrics and to see the artwork and to like even look at the thank yous on the back, right? Like there was something about holding that, and there was almost like a connection with the band that you had. It was art, right? There wasn't just the musical art, there was also the physical art that was being displayed, and I think half the fun was like looking at a CD's artwork and finding a band through that. And just being like, this is so cool. Like, I don't know what this is, but like, this is cool. Let me take a listen to it, and, but he was just kind of talking about how he feels like we want more hands-on things versus digitized stuff that we can't necessarily physically touch and interact with. So I think that's cool. I mourn the loss of CDs a little bit. Even though they're starting to make, but this whole thing about tapes, like to me, like the cassette tape is, besides an 8-track, and you might argue with me, and that's totally okay, but I think tapes suck. Like, I think they're one of the worst forms of music. I remember having like, you couldn't necessarily, you had to like fast forward to get to a song that you wanted to, or rewind. No, you overhit it. No, but you underhit it now. And then like, everybody knows winding that tape with a pencil.
With a pencil.
Got out. But there all of a sudden has been this like resurgence of bands putting out things on cassette too. I just don't think I'll ever buy a cassette ever again, because that is like ingrained in my memory. A traumatizing memory of getting stuck in the tape player.
Oh my God. Yeah. It's okay. So now I gotta ask you, like, do you remember what your first like album was? Do you remember like what your first like cassette, CD, and like vinyl was? Like, were you?
Yeah. I think that I actually physically bought.
Either that you bought, or that like, like someone took you to go bought for you,
So being very immersed in the evangelical church world, this is difficult for me to talk about because it was really bad music, or copycats of music. So I can remember when I was little, my parents had a lot of like Christian artists, and just like, but if I go back to like the first CD that I ever received, it was I got, there was a Christian band called the Supertones, which was like a ska band. The first other one was No Doubt's Tragic Kingdom.
Not bad.
Yeah, my friend bought me. And then the first one that I ever bought myself was actually the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones.
That's a good one.
Yeah, I think it's Let's Face It was the album. First vinyl was probably something I got into vinyl a little bit at college, but it was just beat down, run down, vinyl that you got at garage sales and stuff like that. So honestly, it was going to be probably something like the Doobie Brothers Greatest Hits, or like, because I really like classic rock and the Allman Brothers and stuff like that when I was growing up. But that's probably, I can't remember what the first vinyl was I bought.
I know. I even had to look this up for myself. Okay, because I was like, oh, I can't remember. I could see the album, but I can't remember. So, okay, cassette. It was Madonna, True Blue.
Nice.
And vinyl, which probably came before the cassette, actually, was Duran Duran, Seven and the Ragged Tiger.
Nice.
And then first CD that it was like I bought this with like my own money. It was this band called Unrest, and the album was called Perfect Teeth. And that would have been in 92, 93.
That sounds like a hardcore band.
Yeah, definitely not a hardcore band, I know, but it does sound like, it sounds like a, God, I was listening to the episode that you did with Dan earlier today, and I just got like giggles and flashbacks to like certain, like just some of the ridiculous names of bands. Like
Right.
he mentioned like, None Left Standing, and I was like, oh my God, there's so many just like silly band names that. So many. I mean, they're all kind of silly when you think about it, but
I want to go back. Let's go back to Very Secretary. You play violin, correct?
Yeah.
When did you pick up the violin?
Oh God. It was somewhere between 5th and 6th grade. So
okay.
It's going to sound like wildly impressive, like that, to say like, oh, I've been playing for 40 years, but it's just based off of like how old I am now and like the age I was when I started. But yeah, it started very much like, classical musician, played in like, school orchestra. And then I think the first thing outside of middle school and high school that I played on was, I think it was Braid's first album, actually. Like
the Frankie Welfare.
On a couple of songs there. Yeah.
Yeah. How did you get roped into that?
Oh God. Well, I mean, I knew Todd and Roy from high school, even though they grew up over here in Champaign-Urbana. But again, like the connection, the through line was through skateboarding. And so I knew them through that. And then Bob and I were both freshmen at the University of Illinois at the same time. And so like we knew each other through, again, like this connection through music. And then when Braid formed and became a band, and then they started recording, Bob had this, if you know the album, I mean, it was like he wanted to have one song for every letter of the alphabet. So there's like, it's a 26 album song, a 26 like song album, I mean. And so but yeah, like I just remember Bob saying like, oh, I think it'd be great to have like violin on a couple of songs. And so they're pretty small like parts, on those, but yeah, I mean, again, some of it was just being part of that crew just as a friend, really.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah.
In general. So then how did Very Secretary get started?
Oh, how did Very Secretary get started? So I wasn't in the band like when it formed, but it was started by these two brothers, like Dave and Alan Johnson. And Roy, who was the drummer, the first drummer in Braid, he played drums in Very Secretary. And then like our friend Tim Adamson, again, also a skater. So Roy was a skater, Tim was a skater. Roy was a skater here in town. Tim was from Danville. Tim also played guitar. And so you had Dave and Tim on guitar, Alan on bass, Roy on drums. And then I joined like after, it was almost like right after their first album came out. So we were a 5-piece for a while. And then we just started playing more shows. Tim wasn't Tim just was losing interest on like playing like live shows, and so then he left the band, and then it was the four of us for a while. But yeah, I mean, I think some of my memory of like how did I even just get to like be in the band. I mean, I think it came from this like where could there maybe be like violin like instrumentation like added on to like what was already there. But then I mean we quickly saw and realized that there was more of an opportunity for violin to not be like an add-on, but for it to be like one of the main instruments of the band. And so I played on every single song, like throughout every song, so it wasn't like I had like a violin part or, I was like standing off stage like most of the time. It's like we all played like pretty continuously on everything. But I think a lot of that came down to Dave, the guitarist. His musicianship. I mean, he's incredibly talented guitarist. Probably one of the like most talented guitarists, especially at that time. So many people were playing and had different levels of like musicianship. But I mean, Dave had a real technical like skill and talent that was kind of rare and unusual at that time.
How many, in your recollection, just females were involved in bands at that time?
Yeah, not many. I mean, like there were some, but there weren't many. And I mean, I was definitely playing. I was definitely playing an instrument that was, much more common for females and women to be playing. But there were some, and there was even a band here in Champaign-Urbana called Milo that had a female drummer, a female bass player. They were a fun, like great band. And so I knew that was a thing that was possible. But the whole independent music scene was primarily like just dominated by like men and white men at that,
Really quickly, it's been difficult for me to find women to talk to on this podcast. Like I want to have like a real range. And so I've only had one female on, Julie Lindholm from the Rocking Horse Winter, and this band called the Darling Fire, who she did some work on. I don't know. Do you know the Rocking Horse Winter? They're a Florida band.
I don't know the band, but I mean that name has got to be coming from like a D.H. Lawrence short story.
Yeah. She ended up singing on Chris Caraba's like first Dashboard Confessional, and that really blew up. But it's been this. I'm like, okay, guy. Like it's been because I want to have a wealth of different experiences in life on here, but it's super dominated by white men. Yeah.
I mean, some of it was, I do think some of it was very much a sign of the times. It was also, it was what you're exposed to is what you might be inspired to then like produce and then reproduce as well. I mean, women were definitely part of the scene, but it was, I mean, I hate to say it, but unless you were actively engaged in some other way, like you were more often just going to be like a spectator and someone who was like enjoying what was in front of you. So, I think about how I had deep friendships with so many of these like guys like in high school, and those carried on into college, and then taking photos at shows, booking shows myself, like living at some of those places where there were just like prolific house parties. And then I joined a band, and then I was like playing on other people's like albums, and then I was going on tour, so it's, I think there are ways to have this like scaffolding, if you will, like into the scene and wear multiple hats and have, again, like these different interests and passions that bring you deeper and closer into it. Yeah, but as far as like being on a stage, I mean, it did exist. It just wasn't the dominant,
Yeah.
you know?
What was your, if any, like experience? Well, sure there's an experience, but like, did it feel like going on tour and things like that? Was there ever an issue of feeling of safety, or just kind of like, because like tour can be kind of crazy, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
a lot of times people are staying at random people's houses and things like that. Like, did you ever feel that being a female was alienating in any sense within that scene?
I think in the 90s, like I don't recall like having a worry or a concern around like my sense of safety, like either at a show or performing. There were occasionally like times where you know, different guys like at venues would be like extremely flirtatious, but I don't remember there being anything that made me like super uncomfortable, where I was like this isn't safe for me to keep doing, or this isn't safe for me like in this moment. So I feel very, very fortunate in that regard. I know that is not always the case for people. And I think, you know, it really took a number of years until I had what I felt like was just a ridiculous encounter with another female who was not in a band. And it was when I was on tour with Bob Nana and his like he had many side projects, like kind of like not so much during Braid, but like after Braid. Like he had a lot of different like
City on
styles of
Film,
music.
and yeah.
So it was a City on Film tour, and I think we were I think we were in Ohio, and I just remember it's like middle of the summer, it's hot as hell out. I'm like, along with the rest of the band, we're unloading the van, we're loading in, and I'm carrying an amp. And it was like, you know, it was heavy, but it was also like light enough for me to carry it on my own. And I just remember this woman who was probably roughly around my age, maybe, and she was with some guy who was somehow connected to the venue. So I don't know if she was like, you know, girlfriend or what have you. And you know, my memory of the details is kind of fuzzy, but I remember what she said to me. And the thing that she said, that I had never had someone like ask me up until that moment. But she asked me like which guy in the band I was dating. And I remember thinking, I remember like just sort of, and again, like I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm like actively moving equipment. It's like, it's hot as hell. I'm kind of annoyed, probably hungry, you know. We're trying to like load in to do a sound check. And I'm just thinking like, what? So I think that was one of those moments where I thought like, wow, like how quick it is for like others to just assume like what your role is.
Right.
And you know, and then of course, like later on, of course, I'm like on the stage and I'm like performing in the band. And she came up and said something like later. She's like, "Oh my God, I didn't know you were in the band." And I just remember being like annoyed, and like, you know, kind of annoyed with her, but also like just like frustrated that's the first assumption that we have about each other, you know?
Yeah.
Or that she had of me. I do think that, you know, I think there's different kinds of safety as well. You know,
Sure.
I that tour with City on Film was so fun. There were some very frustrating and annoying moments that tour, but it was also like so fun because, you know, here's Bob and Todd and I were like super close friends, like at the time, still friends, of course, but like we were just, he was like a having a brother on tour. I mean, yeah, it just I have many more like positive, like supportive, like uplifting memories than I do of like ones that are like annoying. But unfortunately, I remember that like clear as day. I mean, that was what, 21 years ago. It's like I could still sort of like see that person. And I just wonder, like, wow, like I hope I hope I don't do that to other people. I'm sure I have in ways that are accidental,
Right.
or I hope are accidental. But yeah, just to make those types of assumptions that my presence must be only like my presence and my affiliation must be only because like I must be dating one of these like ridiculous dudes. You know what I mean? It's like I was just like, what? Like, which one of these like fools would I even be dating? If they hear this, I hope they will laugh at that. But yeah, and they probably don't even know that story because like no one else was around like in that moment, like when it happened.
Yeah. I'm just curious, like, when did you decide you were going to get into social work?
Oh, I remember I remember a distinct moment in 2000 when I was walking across the U of I campus. I remember telling someone who I ended up studying sociology. I started out as an art and design student focusing on photography, and then I switched to sociology. And I remember this friend at the time, peer student, she said, like, have you ever thought about social work? And I could not have responded quick enough by saying like, oh my God, no, I never want to be a social worker.
Right.
And, just, to be like perfectly blunt, had a very like naive, limited, like understanding of what social work was and what social workers did. Very like stereotypical, like understanding of what social workers did. And I think it wasn't until I want to say it was maybe probably like 2006, 2007 that I worked with someone who had gotten her MSW. She was doing fundraising at the time. We were both working for a nonprofit. And she, back when there were brochures for things, remember those days?
For services, yeah.
Yeah, I remember she brought me a brochure for the school of social work at the U of I, and she said, I think you might be interested in this program. And my immediate reaction was like, oh my God, like, no, I don't want to be a social worker. And she kind of, she was persistent, like not in a super annoying way, but it was this cadence of over time, just occasionally saying like, have you thought about it? Or I think you should think about this. But I remember she told me about that it wasn't just clinical work, that the program at the U of I at that time had recently started a macro track focused on advocacy, leadership, and social change. And she said the professor who started this track, I mean, he's looking for students like you who have some other experience and are interested in like more like systems and organizations and rights and things of that nature. So I remember thinking like, all right, like fine, like her name's Alicia Beck. And I was like, fine, Alicia, like I'll talk with him. And so I made this appointment with him, basically just had to like go across campus and chat with him, and told him a little bit about what I had done, what I had studied as an undergrad, what I had been doing. And all of my work was in like, human rights, social justice. It was like the path was so, my God, it's so clear and obvious now, but like, and I told him that I had, thought about going back to school, but wasn't really sure. I thought about law school, but it didn't seem like 100% like the right fit. Thought about maybe getting like master's in public administration or master's in public health, but like none of these like they all felt like limiting in their own way. And I just remember him saying, and I could tell, I knew that he was genuine in how he said this. He said, you are the exact kind of student that we have tailored this program for. And it really was for students who had work experience and were much more interested in working at a systems level as opposed to like direct practice. And again, there was nothing wrong with direct practice. It wasn't discouraged. It was like,
Sure.
like we know that there is this need within the field and within the discipline in this other like arena. And I mean, I was really, really inspired by him. You know, he was a major reason why I ended up deciding to apply to that school. I didn't apply to any other program. I had clearly had no intention of like moving away, you know.
Yeah.
You know, so it was like all eggs were in one basket. And but yeah, like I went to an open house like in the fall of 2000 and ended up applying that fall and then started that following summer. So in June of 2008 is when I ended up starting like the MSW.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, how do you feel like music has played into your one kind of going towards the role of a social worker, and also, you know, maybe how music has played into maybe dealing with some of that burnout that you had, or like just involved, how do you think music has involved or affected ideas about mental health or your own mental health?
God, I mean, in so many ways, like music has been a lifeline, you know, not out of like desperation, just really out of connection and being able to find those other people who had a common shared like interest. Like I'm immediately thinking of like the band The Cure. I mean, I still love The Cure, um and just having friends who also like loved and appreciated that band. And then, you know, fast forward to this short stint of being in what I feel like is like a quintessential emo name band called Days in December. I mean, could it be any like more ridiculously emo? And one of there was a song that we covered that was a Cure song. And I just think about how music can play these music and individual songs in different albums can play a big role in your life at different points of your life and then kind of resurface at different points too. I mean, when I think back on like the mid 90s, and there was a year when three of the four guys in Braid, so it was Roy, Todd, and Bob, and we all lived together in an apartment at a 401 Springfield. And I mean, music was always playing in our apartment. So either Bob played the instrument that could be practiced most easily, like in his room, but Braid also practiced in the basement of that building. And they were so loud because like Roy is a very, very loud drummer. But I mean, and plus like they're a loud band, you know, they're a band that was harder to play, like quieter. But so music was like just surrounded us like at all times. But I remember something like jogged my memory of this a few weeks ago. Like I fell asleep listening to music every single night. And you know, and it wasn't like listening to headphones, it was like on a stereo. So it was like a CD, like, you know, on the stereo. And there were things that were definitely on like pretty like repetitive like rotation, but every single night I fell asleep listening to music. And it's something that I kind of forgot as it was such a big component of my life at that time. Some of it was to drown out like the noise. If we had like bands like staying with us, it could sometimes get loud, or like stay loud like late into the night. But it was also just it was a way to like shift gears and get rest, like true rest.
Yeah.
You know? But yeah, I mean, God, we were watching, both listening and then watching. There's this band called Frog. Are you familiar with this band?
No.
Oh my God, there's a song that again, I think our daughter like exposed us to this band, and like now we've got this like song that's like an earworm, and like we can't like stop listening to it. And I'll have to like look up the name of the song and send it to you. But my husband, I could hear him like last night, like pulling it up on YouTube and like pulling up them playing on KEXP.
Mhm.
And I was just, I was in the kitchen doing something, and it's like I could feel that song like in my chest, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, it was just so like, I was like, wow, there is something like this song is so good. It is written so well. Like the vocals, the instrumentation, the way that the bass line like, intersects with the guitar. Um, and I kept thinking like, what is it about this song? Like why is it like, I mean, it just felt like getting kind of hit by like a lightning bolt in a
Yeah.
good way. And so much of it, I know. So then like I go into the living room, and then we're watching this, we're watching like, four different performances of this song. And this, we're kind of fell down this rabbit hole. Um, and then just paying attention to like the mannerisms of like the singer, and who's the main guy in the band, and the way he was like interacting with like, the host of KEXP. And I was like, I feel like I know this guy. I've played music with people that have very similar like characteristics and mannerisms as this guy. And I mean, I'm pretty certain I never played a show with him, like with his band, if he was ever in a band, and like, many years ago. I think he's a lot younger than me. But there was a familiarity that just like that really struck me as pretty powerful, and made me think like, wow, if this band had been around when Very Secretary was around, like we definitely would have played shows. Like we would have admired this band because of like their sound and their style, and just the way that like their song structure, all these different things. So there's like an aspect within all of that that is maybe not directly connected to like, mental health. And maybe it's more like the mental wealth aspects of like mental health, this like these positive emotions that can still be expressed
Yeah.
by something like unexpectedly. There was another song like not too long ago that just like really struck me. I was like, what is this? I haven't heard. It's like I hadn't heard something like that, but it also had like this deep familiarity. It's just like, oh, it's almost like it's combining like the best of Built to Spill and the Shins and like in Modest Mouse and this other band and this other band. And then it's like, oh, now this is like, here's this new thing,
Yeah.
Yeah, I think sometimes for music nowadays, when I think about the so much of it is tapping into memory for me.
Yes, absolutely.
Like this particular band, like Frog is like, and this one song in particular, like some of their other stuff too, but this one song in particular is just, I mean, it's like it takes me right back to like 1998. It's something about it, is definitely tapping into something that is like an embedded memory that I didn't realize was still kind of like there waiting to be awakened.
I'm wondering what was your crispy burnout like?
Oh God.
If you're okay with sharing that.
I mean, it's like I mean, it's not good, like the getting to a point of like crispy, which I think, both jokingly and also I don't think it's like, diagnostic. It's not like in the DSM anywhere. I mean,
I think it would be called severe.
yeah,
Right.
yeah, it'd be called something else like super stupid that could be billable, crispy was the informal, felt like much more accurate. I mean, it was just knowing that you had to get away from something, like I feel like at this point in my life, I've had many like stressful moments like in work and in life. but I've had a few moments where, especially in like working life, where just so overwhelming, and that it's beyond just an emotional or psychological like manifestation of the stress and the overwhelm. It truly becomes like physiological.
Yeah.
And I just I wouldn't wish that upon like anyone. And I think when stress starts to manifest in those ways, it really is something that you have to pay attention to. So the first like wave of that type of like level of like burnout and crispiness was just like my daughter had just been born. I was midway through like that 2-year stint of being a patient advocate, and I remember like making a promise to myself that I had to find a way, as long as I was in this job while I was looking for another one, I had to find a way to like just have that true like boundary, that emotional boundary and wall of not allowing any or whatever was going on. Because it wasn't always just like veterans who were stressful. I mean, I had like one of the worst bosses of my entire life, like while I was working that job too. And like people who supervise us and leaders in organizations can really make or break your life and in jobs. Like we see this all the time with people. I'm sure you see this with clients if you're working with adults who are working, even younger people who are working. And so that definitely did not help. But once I started to I had to find some ways out of like survival to just compartmentalize the work, to do the best that I could, but to not give like everything of me like to this place. It took time, but that started to shift. And I think those are some of those early lessons of what does it actually mean to have boundaries in your work. Like we talk about this kind of stuff all the time, like social work, and we talk about it like, to people like in general, but no one really talks about how do you actually do that in practice, and what does that look like individually for people in practice. Like I never had anyone give me examples. I really never had anyone like model what healthy boundaries even look like. So it can feel like the Wild West, and just trying to figure it out like on your own. Like you truly have a blindfold and you're like, all right, well, like, does this work? Well, I don't know. Does this work? Let me try this. Let me see if that works, if that sticks. So it came through quite a bit of like trial and error, and then truly like getting away from that job. Like I feel like the year that I worked in engineering was like, if the patient advocate role was like being in a very unhealthy, toxic relationship, like the engineering job was like being taken care of by someone who actually like honored my humanity and respected what I did as a person and was curious about me and wanted me to do well. It was like, it could not have been more opposite. I never had a bad day on that job. I'm grateful for, I can say at this point, I'm grateful for both of those experiences, but like I said earlier, like I will just never ever have a job that will be harder than that one. It was emotionally taxing.
What are the boundaries that you learned to set up for yourself out of that survival?
One was one really came down to just like time, because as a social worker at the VA, you could like request overtime if like you were in the middle of a situation and it ran like 30 minutes or an hour longer than like when your day was supposed to be over. You could make that request, but of course, like, the VA had all kinds of like nonsense rules around overtime needs to be requested before it happens. Well, you aren't typically in a situation, at least not as a patient, and this. I mean, like, come on. Like if you're stuck doing overtime, it's it's not often by choice. It's by
It's
like
crisis work, or
yeah, there's a crisis, there's an emergent situation, there's something that's very time sensitive. What are you supposed to do? Like, request overtime from your boss who you don't really like, who doesn't really like you, and who's already left for the day. It's like this perfect storm of like situations. So I feel like the like really honoring time. I got to a point, I remember, where I was like, I'm not giving this place one more minute of my time. Like, I will get here at 7:45, not a minute earlier and not a minute later. When I'm done at 4, I am done and I am like on the road. And for me, that was hard to do at first because I wanted to like close loops, or I wanted to like wrap up just one more thing, but I got to a point where I just decided like I'm going to like done is going to be done, and I'm going to leave. And it was a habit that I had to turn that into a practice by creating that habit. So that was a big one. I think that's probably the most important one.
Yeah. Did your burnout turn physical?
I would say I could feel myself wanting to say no, and then as soon as I was like getting ready to say no, I remember having like just debilitating migraines. And so like in some ways, like, yes.
Yeah.
And I definitely had like another wave of that back in like 2020, 2021 at a different place that I worked. Just excruciating like migraines that could sometimes be like attributed to like maybe like not drinking enough water, or maybe like the barometric pressure being like too much or too little, but I mean, it was truly like that was an increasing manifestation of like just compounding stress at the place that I was at.
Yeah. I found just in my own personal story where I share this a lot on podcasts, but I think it, social worker to therapist kind of type of thing, was I was not in a healthy work environment. I was actually pretty burned out in doing private practice. Mm-hmm. And I was kind of at a state with my spouse where, I'm not making a ton of money in private practice. Like I'm not, people see those things as like, oh, you charge $150. And it's like, you really kind of see half of that. And your work is like, maybe seeing, maybe not for me anymore, but like 20 clients a week. Mm-hmm. So you're not necessarily killing it, but we needed more money and I was already burned out, and I decided to take another therapy job and do more therapy. And I was kind of stuck in this spot, and I was just severely stuck. I was told that I would be doing brief therapy with people who were dealing with, mild to mid-range anxiety and depression. And what I got really out of the gate was like people who were self-harming or who were like highly suicidal. And I was told I was not going to have to be dealing with that, but they didn't have any other place to go. And so what happened was I felt really stuck. And then my nervous, like I remember it was the night of a rival school show. And do you know rival schools at all? Mm-mm. Walter Schreifel's it's in Quicksand was in Gorilla Biscuits.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and a band called Thursday, but I had a severe panic attack. Mm-hmm. And then that kind of set the tone, and I was like, I just felt stuck. And then one night my nervous system was like, we've had enough of this. Mm-hmm. And like, we're going to take you out whether or not you want to. And I just had severe panic attacks and my nervous system just went on fire. And it's still up there. And it's taken me a lot, but it took me out. Like I was in fight or flight 24 hours a day. I was in insomnia. I some nights would sleep 1 hour a day. I mean, 1 hour in the evening. I took, by the recommendation of my doctor, was like, you need to get some sort of sleep. Like, I don't like, I was taking, as you probably know, benzodiazepines are very dangerous. And if you take them, you're not supposed to take them more than 4 weeks at a time because of dependence. And so I ended up, he was like, I need you to sleep. Like, this is just going to compound and get worse and worse and worse if you're not sleeping. So I ended up taking that for about a year, and now I'm having to wean myself off of it. And it's almost a year now since I've been trying to wean myself off of it. But it was this situation where my nervous system, it was that burnout that was just, it turned it incredibly physical, like very physical, shaking, not sleeping, anxiety in the pit of my stomach. And that's where burnout can get. I thought when I took myself out of that job in that situation that things would like clear up. And what I found out is that the nervous system takes a very long time to heal once it's kind of hit that critical breaking point. I didn't see it coming. Like that was the thing. And even if I saw it, I couldn't get out of it in the moment, and it's been a journey, a really, really long journey, but that's what kind of burnout can get to. It can get to that state where it becomes very physical. You talk with people with chronic pain or any of those things. And, I've seen that you have worked with trauma before, correct? Like you have a lot of trauma informed things that you're doing. What are you working on right now? Because I know you do design and so I think you do. Well, tell me about that. You do. It's like social work and design. You have I forget what the collective or like whatever. I'm sorry.
You got it.
Yeah. Design and social work and systematic stuff, right?
Yeah. It was it started off very informally, probably in 2018. And again, it's like offshoot from VA work where I was doing, what you could call like clinical work through like being a patient advocate, to then more like systems oriented work, like when I was with the homeless team, but also within engineering. And but there was at the time there was a lot of emphasis on systems thinking and systems redesign within the VA. It was a huge initiative, just like ending veterans homelessness was like a huge initiative. This was under like the Obama administration. We were just flushed with so much money to really tackle these big issues. And so that language around like design, systems thinking, systems redesign was just only getting stronger. And having been a macro practicing, but having my clinical license, like social worker, like I was really, really drawn to those aspects of just work in general. And so, like very informally kind of just put out there like social workers who design. And it was the primary motivation was a little bit like Field of Dreams. Like if you put it out there, like will other people start surfacing? Will you be able to find these other people who are maybe like either interested in this thing or working in a very similar way? And like sure enough, like I started to like there were various people who either had like a counseling degree or a social work degree or they were in psychology that had made that transition from either like these clinical practices into like user experience or some aspect of human-centered design. And so, just like counseling, just like social work, there are many, many different ways to be a designer. There's like, these umbrellas of practice are really, really huge. And so it's been a journey, like just finding like, what is that niche? What is that area that I'm drawn to, that I enjoy, that I'm good at? And yeah, just this, the deeper I got into design though, and working more closely with human-centered designers, I started to see where there was just a I mean, it's like what my friend George calls like the BYOE model, like the bring your own ethics, where like in social work, we have a code of ethics. If you are licensed, you are expected to abide by a code of ethics. If you want to call yourself a social worker, you have to adhere to a code of ethics. And I kept finding that here's a peer discipline that's doing work that in many ways is very similar to like macro social work, yet they have no practice standards. They have no scope of practice. They don't have like an element of like clinical supervision, like what we would have. They definitely don't have a code of ethics. And there's a fast and looseness that really occurs when you don't have any of that structure. I don't want to say that being part of a profession that has a code of ethics makes me like, impervious to ever doing anything wrong. But it gives you very strong guidelines on how to do the work. And it also, I think the strongest element of like the code of ethics, at least within social work, is that is peer-to-peer accountability.
Right.
Like there's an expectation that a peer will essentially like call you out or hopefully it gets to a point where you're being reported, but will like address things at the lowest level. Like again, like those expectations and that structure like are pretty non-existent in design. And so I early on, this would have been in like the 2017, 2018 zone. I just saw that there was an opportunity for someone with my interests and someone with my training and then experience to be of benefit in that area of work. And so it's been a winding road. Like it's been nothing but it has not been linear at all. But there has been this through line from like day one, really. And so much of it, maybe if I ever mapped it out, Jeremy, I could probably map it out and make these connections to like skateboarding and punk rock.
Yeah.
And like, silly emo bands and all that stuff, like it's all interconnected. But the kind of work that I do now, so I've been very, very lucky that, I've been one of these like earlier adopters of this type of practice of almost taking social work as a profession and design as a discipline and smashing those two together and then creating this new third thing. And for me, the primary area of practice has been just around trauma-informed care, trauma-informed design. And that has definitely evolved into other like tangents within that. But I've had like some just wild like job opportunities. I mean, I ended up being the first social worker at the White House with this tech team called U.S. Digital Service, which doesn't exist anymore. It's been taken over by Doge. Everyone knows what Doge is, unfortunately. But I served a 2-year term from 2022 to 2024, like getting to do that work, which is just wild. And then the types of things that I'm working on now are there's a certain amount of like this, I don't know what I would call it. I need to probably come up with like a way to define it, because I feel like it's a blend of like coaching and supervision, but it's neither exclusively one or the other.
Mm-hmm.
But there's some sort of like fusion of those two. I get a lot of like people who might just request like consultation and support on the types of things that they're doing. I'm a big advocate because, again, I saw this in my own burnout, my own crispiness as a social worker. I'm a huge advocate of like supporting the people who are doing any kind of this work. Even when you were sharing your story, like I was like I was listening to you, and I was also like thinking and wondering, like, what did support look like for you? I mean, not to say that would have like, eliminated or removed all of that stress and burnout, but it has a significant difference on our ability to like navigate some of these things.
Well, I came in just to kind of like give that information, I came into this thing that was not highly structured. I was hoping for a team of people, and it was like, well, we don't really have supervisors. We have a clinical nurse that's the head of the program. And when I was like, what do I do about this, client who's experiencing intense suicidal ideation and who is like, I don't know what to do with this person. And the response essentially was, well, what would you do in private practice? And so it wasn't this kind of like, these are the standards and procedures that we have. There was no clinical leadership at that time. And by that time, they set me up with like, basically like a mentor that was like this wonderful woman named Tammy. And she was acting as kind of like a supervisor for me, but it was too late. It was too late by that time. And I had come in hoping for a team of peers and people that I could talk to and people that I could feel supported by. Some were remote, and then we had to spend like 1 or 2 days in the office, but we all had our office doors closed. And the weirdest thing was like, this professional setting. It was I don't want to go into details, but I found more support in community mental health than I did anywhere at this kind of more bougie, upscale medical practice. When I was in community mental health, I was an LMHCA, so I was pre-licensure, making $16 an hour. And dealing with Medicaid clients, right? So and I was working with children and adolescents, but all of us had created this section of our wing where we had our doors open and we would like come into each other's offices and be like, you're not going to believe like what just, we just had each other's backs.
Yep.
And there was no semblance of that. There was no, it was just kind of like,
yeah.
I didn't even know.
Like good luck. Yeah.
And I was just, I needed something like that. I needed somebody to say, here's what you can do about this. What you're like, supervision is huge. Having a good supervisor.
It's massive.
Right. It's just like, it is unbelievably helpful, especially when you're new in the field.
I mean, it's two-pronged. It's like having a good, supportive, kind-hearted supervisor, and then also having that practice of weekly supervision.
Right.
I mean, it's like and sometimes that's the same person, but at least in social work practice, it was discouraged from that being like the same person. Like the person who does your clinical supervision, at least at the VA, it was encouraged that be someone that you do not directly report to, for for obvious reasons. And but I think because that was a foundation and a requirement as part of that pathway to licensure, I've thought about this like many times over the years, like spending the first couple of years like going through that practice of weekly supervision with someone who was much more seasoned than me, someone who I could go to and be like, oh my God, this is the wild shit that I'm dealing with this week, or I've got this situation that, like, what is happening? I don't even like, it's so like over your head that you feel like you're like, did I learn anything in school? I mean, it can make you, it can just make you second guess everything that you thought you knew, or that you thought that you were learning. And so to have the spirit of that kind of support and practice and pattern, and then to shift to, it's not required. You can kind of maintain it, but most people don't. And I found myself, like, when I left the VA in 2016 and joined the team at UIUC, because then I I really left the VA because I was commuting and my daughter was going to be starting school like soon. And so I was like, I don't want to be on the road and like I'm going to miss her life or, and so it was just what was happening like in my life at that time. And but then I get a job at the School of Social Work where I got my MSW, and there just wasn't. I mean, I was one of very few people who even had their clinical license at a School of Social Work, and so now I have a bunch of like social work peers, but most of them didn't even know what supervision was because they hadn't been through it themselves. And so I found myself like starting to really like yearn for that type of like mentorship and guidance like all over again. And again, like out of my direct line supervisor, like supervision is really it's a fascinating practice. And I'm certain, I feel very confident about this in like technology work, but also in civic tech work and design work, that it is a necessary lifeline for many people. I mean, there's the types of people and the situations that they bring to me, like are supervision types of challenges where we could at least like acknowledge what is happening. We can kind of like detangle some of the complexity. Because people like often say like, well, I already have a coach and I already have a therapist. It's like, well, supervision is neither one of those things, It's really someone who understands the work that you're doing and can help you make sense of it and navigate some of that. A therapist can maybe help with some of that sometimes, but unless they have similar experience as what you have, it's really hard to get that type of benefit from like the therapeutic relationship. And a coach, I don't know, we could do a whole other podcast on like just coaches, and I have probably too many strong opinions about coaches, but we won't go there. I won't digress. But yeah, I saw up close and personal, like how beneficial that was as a practice. And so I've really been thinking and practicing in the way that I do some of the consultation work that I do. I try to bring the best of those aspects into like all the things that I get to do now.
Yeah. Just like, I don't want to keep you too long.
We've been talking for a while. Oh my God. We've been talking for a long while.
I talked with somebody and I didn't mean for it to go that long, but it was like 4 hours. And I didn't even
the longest podcast on the planet.
I was able to like, I was like, it was this guy, Greg, that I knew was a drummer. And I was like, I have to nail this down to like an hour and a half and somehow doing that. But like if somebody wanted, okay, first question, what is trauma-informed design?
Well, trauma-informed design it's a newer practice that takes into consideration that individuals may have experienced a traumatic event at least one point in their lives. And the way that we bring people into design as a practice, design as a discipline, it often has a pathway of either designing spaces, so like the physical environment, designing experiences through like design research and understanding like behaviors and what people like wants and needs. And taking a trauma-informed design approach is just having a literacy and an understanding that trauma is a thing that is pretty prevalent. And I mean, the percentages that are often quoted are from 2014. There's like the one that says like, the worldwide statistic is that 70% of adults will have experienced at least one traumatic event at some point in their lives. That was in 2014. That was before a pandemic, a global pandemic. It was before a double Trump presidency. It was before several other like worldwide events. And I think it's pretty safe to say that statistic is much closer to 100%, if not 100%. And what do we do if we acknowledge that as a true thing, then how do we integrate that into how we interact with people and how we design, experiences, products, spaces, technology for them? So it's more than anything, it's taking that into account and letting that inform how and why we should design differently.
It's interesting because I'm moving into a new office, and I was just explaining, I was just like, hey, like, I think I need some more furniture because there's this huge space in the back, blah, blah, blah. And my wife was like, why don't you put the couch this way and you can have your chair there? And I was like, because I don't want me in the way of the door. Like, I don't, I want, and it wasn't really registering to her that I was basically saying, I want a person when they come in because of traumatic instances to know that, because they're going to look where the exits are, right? And I don't want to put myself in front of that exit so that they have at least a feeling of safety that if they need to go, they can get out this way. And trying to kind of always keeping that in mind with the different offices that I've kind of had and kind of designing them so that there was that space for somebody who, might be in fight or flight as they're, working with a lot of trauma people. Like it's big for them to have access or feel like they have access to a door, and so designing spaces in that capacity, even from interior design kind of aspect,
Yeah, but there's a huge area of practice, for architects, interior designers, who are looking at things from, the layout of a space to the modes of egress, what, how many exits are there? What's the lighting like? Is there carpet? Is there, so there's these aspects around color and lighting and other physical aspects of safety that can provide a serious amount of comfort for people, but also for you as well, you know?
Right.
So, it's something that's very common amongst the veteran population, and especially the combat veteran population, is never wanting your back to the door.
Yep. 100%.
And so even if you're at a restaurant, being able to see, to have a line of sight, to a door.
Yep.
And again, for whatever reasons, that some of that is related to military experience, that some of that is related to other experiences that are also related to that military experience. And, I think about what are those things for me? And I remember when I was working at, there's a design center on the campus here, and I was the associate director, and, we had this new beautiful building that was being built. And I remember one of those early days of getting a tour of the classrooms. We had, most of the space was more play oriented space, but there were we had 3 or 4 distinct classrooms, but one of them was set up with who say, I don't know, because I don't remember ever my opinion being asked, but it was set up that all of the students had their back to the door and there was only one exit. And I said, this is not going to work.
Yeah.
I said, this is just not going to work. And then there was a different classroom where, I think whoever would have been teaching, whoever it would be, they would have their back solely to the door, and have no line of sight of the exit. And I was just who asked who about this, So it's even there's this aspect of the actual designed elements, but there's also this component of involving people who are going to be utilizing that space.
Right.
So, getting people actually integrating that into the decisions, not making those an afterthought. And I just remember pointing this out to this person who was a peer associate director, and he said, he was real dismissive, and he said, well, it's too late to change it now. And I thought, wow, like what an ironic bummer that we are going to call ourselves a human-centered design center, and we can't even get this like right, you know?
Right.
So it's yeah, I'm a big proponent of alignment, you know, and like trying to practice in alignment. And like if I say I'm going to do something, are my actions or my behaviors like, are they congruent? Are they aligned with that thing that I'm saying? And I see so much of that irony in human-centered design. It's like sometimes it's like it should be called dehumanizing centered design.
Yeah. I worked at a school for in Oregon for kids who had been kicked out of basically the public school system, and they either had developmental delays or they were just extremely traumatized. And part of our job was to kind of bring that trauma-informed kind of care and, you know, kind of educate some of the teachers about, you know, what could be triggering or, you know, stuff like that. And it's really cool to be able to help impart that knowledge to people. If somebody were looking to get into that kind of design work, is there a way that you feel like there's a path there, or there's like, how do you think somebody might be able to get involved with what you're doing, or even design work?
Yeah, I think, the design and tech industries have been pretty actively imploding for a couple of years now. But there are still many people who are practicing and doing this kind of work. I think one pathway that I've seen a number of people who started out as designers, design researchers, and they have since like pursued an MSW or a counseling degree, and they're wanting to do something similar to like what I've done, and like find a way to like blend these two and like kind of create your own like new thing, which I just love. I think it's like fascinating. And I think other ways are just, you know, how can you live out your values, you know? So, you know, not everyone may want to go like the route that you and I have gone and like pursue counseling or pursue social work. So I think just identifying and articulating like what are the things that you have done, what are the things that you enjoy doing, what are the things that you maybe have been trained in, and what are some of the things that you want to be trained in, and are there pathways to getting some of that education, that experience that doesn't necessarily always like include like a master's degree, you know, because there are other ways to do these things. But I think a good chunk of this often comes down to have you been able to articulate what your values are? And we would be surprised to find that a lot of people like think they know what their values are. They think that they are living out their values, but then when you ask them what they are, they're like, I don't know. Like they haven't really necessarily like identified what those are, which it's not uncommon, you know.
That's why I do a values deck with people.
Ooh, which one do you have? Do you have one?
I do have one that you can print out, but there's also a website where you can do a values sort. And what it'll do is they'll give like 53 different values, and you sort important, not important to you. And then they make you, or I've done this with teens and stuff like that, just whittle them down to your like top 5.
So you're reminding me of this person is in your neck of the woods, actually. The artist Lisa Congdon. Does that name ring a bell?
No.
Okay. Congdon. I believe she's in Oregon. She's got this beautiful values deck. It's the Live Your Values deck. Sort out, honor, and practice what matters most to you. It's just very beautifully designed. And she's someone who you might be inspired by her, because she spent a good chunk of her career early on in the nonprofit sector and started doing illustrations just kind of on the side. And then she is a full-fledged, full-time like artist and illustrator. She has like a thriving business. Just beautiful, beautiful work. But yeah, that's like, I think talking with people about their values, helping them like articulate what they are. I feel like that's probably one of the best first things that people can do, because it's going to very quickly narrow, like, am I living in my values or am I not? You know, or
for young adults and teenagers, it's super, because they're career oriented. What do I do? I was like, if you can find a career that hits your value systems and that you're living within that value system, like, you're going to feel fulfilled in what you're doing. You're going to be living this out. It's not to say that values can't change. You know what I mean? Like, you know, sometimes traumatic events, you know, happen and your values are changed through them, you know? But you know, right now, what is that value system? And it's really, I think it's really helpful for, I mean, I do it with almost every single one of my clients, just so that they can get some bearings, you know, on what they're thinking. Because so many people are lost right now, especially in the job market and everything like that. You know, they're just feeling pretty beaten down, you know, and I think a lot of them are coming into the corporate world and just being like, this is not what I signed up for. This is not what I thought it was going to be, you know, type of thing. And a lot of disillusionment as well. So, well, I appreciate you. And I thank you so much. I'm so glad that we were able to make this happen. I really want to quickly, if people want to get in, just look at some of what the work that you do, what's a good way for them to access it or find out more about it?
Yeah, I think probably the two best ways, easiest ways to find me are at social workers, who.design. So www.socialworkerswho.design. And then like on LinkedIn, I have a very strong love-hate relationship with LinkedIn. It's so social media, it's still in that social media family, but it is how I have actually found like many of these other folks who are interested in trauma-informed design and also like exploring like social work and design. So, I mean, I've easily connected with several thousand people around the world, like just because of that. So
that's cool.
I don't work for LinkedIn or promote it, but that a way that people typically do find me.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Rachel. I'm so glad we were able to do this.
Thanks so much, Jeremy.
Yeah. Keep in touch.
You too.
Awesome. Thank you, Rachel. I appreciate you.
All right. Bye.
Bye. Well, that does it for this episode. I'd like to thank Rachel for coming on again. You can find her work at socialworkerswho.design. Again, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.